I'm James David Eller, and I'm 74.
The purpose of our interviewing today is to learn a little bit about your childhood in Deerfield Beach and that of your parents. So let's start with your as far back generation as possible and tell me about the first generation that came to Deerfield.
My grandfather, Hoyt Eller, came to Deerfield in 1923. He was employed to come down and be the lead carpenter at the Boca Hotel. Was being built. So he did the finished carpenter work at the Boca Hotel. And he had 5 children, my dad being the only boy. And he brought the kids and his wife with him, and they ended up living over the Deerfield side of the, which was the only place to live. Then there was nothing in Boca Raton except the hotel, and so most people lived in Deerfield, where there were grocery stores and places to hang out. Probably a bar or something, who knows.
Uh, did he spend his entire life there doing carpentry work?
No, he did the carpenter work initially because he was a finished carpenter, and then when he saved his money, and then he started farming west of here, and initially, and then ended up in Boynton, west of Boynton, farming.
Where was his farm in Deerfield? Can you give me a kind of an idea between Dixie and 441 or Lyons?
It was out around 441. Of course, I was not around at that time, but when he got the farm in Boynton, of course, I would be up there with sometimes to catch rabbits.
Do you remember any stories that your grandfather might have told you about old Deerfield?
Well, I hadn't thought about that very much. My grandfather, by the time I came along, was pretty elderly, and he didn't talk a whole lot. So most of my stories would have come from my dad or mother.
Now tell me about your father.
Well, my father was a interesting in school. He did well in school, and he dressed in a suit or a sport coat with a tie every day, which we got the old pictures of him doing that, and he was well respected to a point that when you got to, if you wanted to take any math courses other than plain math, if you wanted algebra, for instance, because you had to have it in order to get, if you want to be an engineer, you had to have had algebra. And they didn't teach that at the local school. Dad had to go to Fort Lauderdale, where instead of Pompano, which is where all the kids here went initially. So he, in order to get to Fort Lauderdale, they didn't have a bus. So he said, well, I'll drop the bus if you'll let me. So they apparently checked him out and said, all right, you have to pick up the kids along the highway. Dixie Highway is the only highway then, and take them to school. And you're the bus driver. So here's the keys, I guess. So I got pictures of him with his bus.
And how old was he?
16.
Okay. Say my father, Marlin Eller, was 16 at the time. Just say it.
My father, James Marlin Eller, was 16 years old at the time.
Do you remember any stories that he told you of his young childhood growing up in Deerfield?
Well, the stories that I recall, back in those days, when you went to high school, you were not allowed to go to high school if you were married. And my father and mother had known each other since they were like 6 or 7 years old, up in the north of Alabama, where they both originally came from. When they were kids up there, they were sweet on each other. And so my father and my mother decided to get married this summer before my dad's senior year in high school. And so if you came out with people who knew that at the time, they would not let you go to high school if you were married. So Dad had to keep this secret. He brought Mother home with him. She lived with his parents there on Dixie, but they were secretly married, and so that was the beginning of the relationship. Now, when his he had a sweetheart in high school who later on became mayor of Fort Lauderdale, and once when I was doing an interview with her on something, and she brought up, she said, I just loved your dad so much that he could play a good guitar, and all the girls liked him. And she said, but he would, all of a sudden, his senior year, he wouldn't date any of us, and we were upset about it. And then we found out he got married. That's why he was treating us that way. So I said, okay.
Did he help your grandfather out in the farm?
He farmed 1 year with my granddad, and they had a freeze come through, and right before the crop was to be picked, everything got frozen and ruined. So all the work that they had done ended up not being marketable. And my dad threw in the towel, told his father, I'm not going to ever do this again. I want to get paid if I work. So he quit working for his dad and started his own machine shop there on Dixie Highway.
Did your grandfather own a gas station?
They had a gas station, yes.
Say my grandfather had a gas station. Tell me a little bit about where it was.
Well, there was a gas station on Dixie Highway that my dad controlled, and I guess he worked for his father there for a while. And so I guess it was the only gas station in Deerfield at the time. So they also did repair work in the garage there, and that was the beginnings of a business which we eventually developed into a manufacturing operation, which we still do.
So did your father ever go to college?
My dad was accepted at Georgia Tech, intended to go to Georgia Tech, but his father pulled the plug on him as far as paying for it, because he didn't think, since he got married secretly without his father's permission, my grandfather told him, you're on your own, boy. And so he would not support sending him to college. So Dad had to stay, and because that made my dad upset, and that's why he left his father and started his own business in the machine shop.
Tell me about the evolution of that machine shop.
Well, Dad had he didn't have anyone to teach him all the particulars, so he did it out of books that he bought, machine shop books, and he bought, a lathe and a milling machine and grinders and all the things you need for a machine shop, and he did the repair work for just about anybody that needed it. I know one of our big customers was Dakota Trucking Company. Had a lot of trucks, and they needed anything done, they would come over, and my dad would take care of it. And then I started working in that shop. It was right next to our house. Our house was right next to the shop, I guess I should say. And when I became old enough to do something, my job was sweeping the floor in his office. I had to do that every day. Eventually graduated into sweeping in the machine shop, and I made 50 cents a week. And I saved that 50 cents I spent a quarter and saved the 25 cents, I should say. Uh, so I became a saver at that point, and it became a habit. And I still do that, save money.
Tell me about your time growing up in Deerfield.
Well, when I started school at Deerfield Elementary School, I was the only boy in the first grade. Of course, we had segregated schools then. My friends who happened to be black went to a different school. So we would get together after school and we would play and do all the things that boys like to do, and from climbing trees to fishing down at the Hillsboro, so on and so forth. I had 5 or 6 girlfriends. All the girls liked me, and they didn't have too much other choices to choose from. So I thought it was normal for a boy to have a bunch of girlfriends. I liked it, and that was the early days. Then in 3rd grade, another boy moved into town in our class, and his name was, well, I don't know, I should name names, Dewey Bennett. And Dewey and I looked at each other and at playtime, and for some reason decided to fight. Didn't have a whole lot to do back then, as before television was common in people's homes. Boys fighting or wrestling was entertainment. So Dewey and I went at each other and wrestled around, got sand spurs all over us. And after about 5 or 10 minutes of that, I'll never forget, there Dewey sat up and he looked at me. He said, "You're a good fighter." That's one of the greatest, best compliments I ever had. At that time, anyway, it was certainly true. And so we became friends. We're still friends.
Didn't you have an experience of swimming across the canals and going over to what is now Deerfield Island?
Well, if you wanted to get there, you had to swim over, and you just had to watch out.
Stop. Start all over again and say, in order for me to get to Deerfield Island, I have to swim.
In order for me to get to Deerfield Island, we had to swim over. And main thing you had to do is watch out for the alligators, because there were alligators up and down the Hillsboro at the time. My father finally gave me permission to kill any alligator that came a certain distance east, basically east of the railroad tracks. I was allowed to shoot them with a single-shot .22 rifle. I had it, but you had to shoot them right behind the eye and the temple, and they would roll over, and you could go back to swimming.
Tell me how many you shot.
Oh, maybe 2. I think they put the word out, watch out for that boy.
During the time that you were swimming across to Deerfield Island, wasn't there some kind of a myth about Al Capone having buried some treasure over there?
That's true. Al Capone, of course, had been a figure in Deerfield. He'd give money to people, so they thought he was a good guy, giving out money. So he had. I don't think most people realize he was a bad guy in his way of getting that money, but Capone Island was named for him. I can't remember exactly why. I guess he owned it. Well, he did own it, come to think about it. The government took it away from him after they arrested him. But no, we would swim over and try to avoid the alligators, and like I said, I was allowed to shoot them if they got past the bridge to our another swimming hole we had, which is where the park is now. And so I had my dad's permission, and he gave me a single shot .22 rifle to shoot the alligator if they got, but I had to shoot them in the temple, and they only shot 2, I guess, but they would roll over. And I guess they put the word out, not to get near that boy.
What else did you do for entertainment? Did you go to the beach a lot?
Well, my mother and her friends would go to the beach, and I, of course, go with them. And we would fish a lot. The There were certain times of the year where the blues, certain type of fish that ran at schools would come down, and everybody in town would just about would stop working, and the word would get out the blues are here. Everybody, the stores would close, and everybody grab a fishing pole and run down to the beach and start catching fish.
We're going to take a break because the bell's going to ring.
Okay. Probably get dark.
David, tell me a little bit about your time as a child and your fishing and bringing fish over to Pops. Tell me what Pops was and what you did for him.
Well, Pops was the only fish store selling fish in Deerfield. In fact, they're still here, as far as I know. And I can't remember how I found out. Oh, I'd have to go there and get my bait to catch fish. I go to Pops, and so one day Pops asked me, he says, you ever catch enough fish that you don't eat them at home? He said, bring them down here and I'll buy them from you. Well, being the little aggressive entrepreneur that I was, I heard that, and so I went to fishing harder, and I caught a bunch of fish one day, and I put them in my little red wagon, and took them down to Pops, and he paid me $2.56. And my dad was only giving me 25 cents at the time for sweeping his machine shop up. So I went back to my dad. I said, look, in one morning, and at 2 hours, I made $2.50. You got to give me a raise. My dad's response was to look at me very sternly. He said, you're fired. So I lost my job. And then the fish stopped biting, and after a little while of that, I went back to my dad and said, can I have my job back? He said, what's the matter, fish not biting? I said, yeah. So that was my lesson on entrepreneurship and business.
You said that a lot of your friends were black, your young friends.
Well, boys, if you wanted to play ball, what have you, or climb trees, there was very few kids around, so we'd meet down at the canal, the Hillsborough Canal, because they like to fish too, and we get down there catching fish, and we catch crawdads to use as bait, and then catch fish, and we became buddies and friends, and so.
How did you communicate with them at the time? Were there telephones?
No, we just knew that after school and hang out down there, you know.
So, but you didn't go to, when I ask you a question, give me a more thorough explanation, because they aren't going to hear my questions. They're only going to hear your explanation.
Okay.
Tell me about your relationship with the boys, and how did you communicate with them to tell them you were going to go fishing?
Well, the boys and I would go, we was going to school. They happened to go to a different school than I went to. The schools got out about the same time. And so we go down there looking for fish, for fun. And in my case, had made a business out of it. When I found out I could sell the fish, I would go down there and catch fish and take them to Pops and sell them. So that was my first business activity.
Now, I understand that your father was police commissioner at one time. Is that correct?
He was elected as a commissioner, and at the time, the commission was...
Say, my father was elected.
My father was elected, and then at the time, there was, if you were elected, had the most votes during the election, you could select which division of the city that you would like to be responsible for. So some of the black ministers came over to ask my dad to be the police commissioner, because they felt they needed someone they could be that was friendly to their community to be in that position, because it was hard to get the policemen to come into that community. So they felt that my dad would do something about that, which he did. One of the first things he did was hire a black man that just got out of the Army to be a policeman. I think it was Mayo Howard was his name, as I recall. But Dad put him on the police force. And
His name Moses?
Mayo Howard.
Mayo Howard.
Yeah. And then there were some folks in town didn't like that, and so they told my dad that if he arrested their daughter or some of their folks, that there was going to be a problem. So my dad had to ride in the car with them for the first few weeks to protect him from some rascals in town.
Did that work out?
Eventually, yeah, they got tired of. They didn't want to fool with my dad that much. My dad was in pretty good shape, and he one of his hobbies was boxing, so nobody wanted to mess with him.
Tell me about your early days and the way that you learned how to play the guitar, or why you learned to play the guitar.
Well, I wanted to play the guitar as a young man or a child, and my dad said, your hand's not big enough. So I kept showing my dad my hands, and he finally one day he said, well, you're getting pretty close. So I went and got his guitar and out one day, and he said he would teach me some chords, and so he did. I learned 3 chords in one day, and those 3 chords I could sing about half a dozen songs. And the first song I remember learning was Birmingham Jail. For some reason, that Dad taught me that words to that. And it's only two of the chords are used in that. So I've been playing guitar ever since. And I own 13 guitars, which my wife likes me to play, and I was playing when we met. So
The evolution of your company started with your father. Tell me a little bit about how that worked and what it evolved into, and how you came to work in it and what it is today.
Well, my dad had the only machine shop between Delray and Fort Lauderdale. So anyone that had any machine work they needed done that would come there. And we had rock pits west of Deerfield, which had a lot of machinery there, and they were always breaking something, and they'd bring it over for my dad. And then some of the trucking companies, like Dakota Trucking, was one of our good customers. And whenever something would break, they would bring it in for my dad to repair. And so that's how we started off the business. Then when I got into it, I had learned some things in college and helped develop. I worked in a laboratory.
Just a second, Dave. Are we picking up all this sound that I can hear? Okay. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
When I was at the University of Florida in college, I worked in a lab up there on a part-time basis, and I'd also learned some things that were patentable. So I applied for some patents, primarily on pumping and power transmission systems on pumps. And at the time before that, all the pumps had to be hooked up through gears or belts and pulleys. And I developed a hydraulically fluid-powered power transmission system to connect to the engine to the pump, or the pump could be put in remotely any location in a matter of minutes rather than taking days. And it became very popular. So with that technology and product, we took the company up to about 400 employees over a few years. And got another factory, built another factory in Vero Beach. So,
Tell me about your getting involved in the Deerfield Observer.
well, the Observer newspaper was the only newspaper that was there, and there was it was falling on hard times as the people that owned it got interested in opening another newspaper in another town and started neglecting the one here in Deerfield. So I got interested in our concern, really. At the time, I was Chamber of Commerce president that year, and so I got concerned about it and spoke to them. And they said, "Well, if you're that concerned, it's for sale. You buy it and do what you want." I said, "How much you want for it?" And they told me, and I called a lawyer. We want to do a transaction here. And so by that afternoon, I owned the newspaper, and I still own it. So that was, 30-some years ago.
How many years have you owned the paper?
That's around 35 years, as I recall, something like that. I've never taken a penny out of it. I've put money into it, but I've never taken a penny out of it.
What was one of the best times that you ever experienced in Deerfield? Some of the best times. What were you doing?
Well, every year we would have what was called at the time Cracker Day, where all the adults, when you're a kid, you see these adults acting silly, and they get up on the stage and dance around and clap their hands and play fiddles and guitars and just having a good old time. And that was always fun to be a kid watching the adults do that. And so we look forward to that for every year. I think they changed the name to somebody that liked Cracker Day. It came out of Georgia. They called the people who made corn and they cracked it into grits. They were called crackers. And some reason some folks didn't like that, and they eventually changed the name to, I forget what it's called now, but it's not called Cracker Day anymore.
Were there ever any, as a child, do you remember any tragedies that occurred or big events that occurred in Deerfield?
Well, my earliest memories go back to World War II. I was born in 1941, so the war was going strong by the time I was old enough to be a little boy. And I'd been playing in the front yard on Dixie, and the soldiers that were from the Boca Raton field would march. I guess the officers would have the soldiers march, and they would march by our house. And I would stand up by the picket fence and watch them, and some of the soldiers would break ranks and wave at me. And I just get a thrill every time that happened. And that's really my earliest memory.
Don't put your feet up and down there and make vibrations.
Sorry.
That's okay. Were there any other special moments that you can remember? For instance, did the field band ever entertain? Did you ever go to any entertainment at the field band?
What do you mean, field band?
From the base. They used to go around and entertain people. Did you ever go to one of their concerts?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. Didn't you have a relative that played music at the Boca Raton Hotel?
Well, my father did. My father was at an age where you get drafted in the Army during World War II. They were getting pretty desperate for men, but they would take the boys that didn't have any family and draft them first, and then ones that had one child would get next, and then two child would be next, and so on and so forth. And I sometimes, after I grew up, figured, but then my dad had me to have two children instead of one, so he wouldn't get drafted. But they the base, there was a lot of activities from the Boca Raton Air Base with the soldiers marching, and I would be in the front yard and watch them, and they'd wave at me, and it's one of my earliest memories.
Okay. Is there any other points, either your father, grandfather, or yourself, that you would want people to hear about Old Deerfield, what it was like to grow up? Did you have a lot of fun? Was it a carefree kind of life environment? Tell us about anything that you might want to say about it.
Well, back in the old days, before television was around commonly, back in the early 50s or late 40s, early 50s, people didn't have TVs to sit at home and watch. I remember when the first television showed up in Deerfield, and the doctor, it was the Dr. Higgins' house. He was the only doctor in town. He bought a TV, and he had a daughter about my age, and she invited us over to watch TV. And we got to doing that on a regular basis for a few days, and I guess the doctor got tired of having these kids hanging out in there, so we were uninvited, and then Mr. Ballard bought a TV, and so the kids would come to his house and watch TV at his house. So we did that for a long time, and then Ballards went on vacation. Well, me and my buddy Dewey Bennett went down to watch TV, and there's nobody home. So Dewey said, "What are we going to do? Hopalong Cassidy comes on shortly." And I said, "Well, let me go. I'll get a crowbar and we'll pop a window open." So I ran to the shop, got a crowbar. We got up there, and we popped that window open, climbed in there, started watching Hopalong Cassidy. And a few minutes later, there's a knock at the window, and looked out there, and the policeman there. He said, "What are you boys doing?" And I remember saying to him, "Well, Mr. Ballard, they're off on vacation. They forgot to leave me a key." The policeman started laughing. He said, "Well, come on, get out of there. Come on, I'm going to have to take you down to the jail." So he took us down and pretended we were going to have to go in jail. At the time, the jail was in Deerfield. Each town, I guess, had its own jail, and there's mostly drunks in there and that were in jail. And so we go in, and they stamped the ink pad on their palm and scared the daylights out of us. I remember crying and saying, "Oh no, don't throw me in there." And after they scared us properly, then they told us they weren't going to actually put us in the jail cell, but that we need to not do that again. I found out later, my dad actually was police commissioner at the time, and the policeman had called my dad, told him what my dad had told him, take him down there and do that. So it was all set up by the adults to scare the daylights out of us, and it worked.
What do you remember, if anything, about the Diamond Club?
The Diamond Club was over on Dixie Highway, and it was an establishment for our black community, and they allowed music. And on Saturday night, you could hear the music playing loud, and they apparently were having a good time, and that's all I remember about it. I've never been in there. Never.
Is there anything else that I love the story about Hopalong Cassidy. I think that's wonderful. Are there any other stories you want to tell us?
About growing up? And well, of course, I could tell stories. I've got to make sure I don't embarrass somebody with some stories that might come out.
What more stories?
Well, did I already tell you about the fight with me and Dewey?
Yes, you did.
Okay, well, that's when in 1954, we had the pastor at the Presbyterian Church helped to organize a low league baseball team, and so he got boys together that were old enough, and we only could find see a baseball team's 9 people, and we could only find 8 guys that would play, and so we had a little league baseball team with 8 players. So I played first base and I also pitched. I was fortunate enough to have an uncle who had been in the Navy and had been a catcher in the Navy with a pitcher named Herb Dudley who lived in Florida and would visit my uncle quite a bit. And so Herb Dudley volunteered one day to teach me how to throw a curveball. So he showed me how to hold the ball and how to flip my wrist a certain way so I could throw a curve and I could throw a drop ball. And so I was just a kid, but I could throw a mean curve and drop ball, and that'd strike out kids. So I became pretty well respected in the community of low league players of being able to pitch good. And so we formed we had our own team in Deerfield. Then at the end of the season, put an all-star team together, and players from Pompano and Wilton Manors and Deerfield. There's only 2 of us from Deerfield that made the team, but we started playing and we beat West Palm, we beat Miami, we beat Orlando, and we ended up going up to Carolina for the playoffs, and we went up and ran into these North Carolina boys, and they seemed like a foot taller than us, and the community in Deerfield and the communities down here got together and bought us uniforms. We had nice fancy uniforms, and we went up there. We got beat 2-1, and that was heartbreaking because I was looking at the guy that I was standing near, and he had a beard, a little bit of beard coming through. I remember going to the coach and I said, "Hey, these guys are older than us. They got beards already." And he said, "Well, we don't have to prove age. Apparently now says nothing we can do about it." And so his name was Mr. Hughes, and he said, "I'm sorry, boys, we got to play the game." So we played our hearts out, but it's hard to beat boys when you're 12 and they're 13 or 14. It's enough difference there. It's tough. So we lost 2-1. I remember we all cried. We were embarrassed to cry in front of each other, but it was heartbreaking. And the parents and stuff, the community really got together. A lot of them went up for the game in Carolina. So, good times.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Yours.